Hare Krishna. Today we will be discussing the Srimad Bhagavad-Gita chapter 5, text 8 and 9 translation. A person in the divine consciousness, although engaged in seeing, hearing, touching, smelling and eating, moving about, sleeping and breathing, always knows himself within that he actually does nothing at all, because while speaking, evacuating, receiving, opening or closing his eyes, he always knows that only the material senses are engaged with their objects and that he is aloof from them. A person in Krishna consciousness is pure in his existence, and consequently he has nothing to do with any work which depends upon five immediate and remote causes: the doer, the work, the situation, and the endeavor and fortune. This is because he is engaged in loving transcendental service of Krishna. Although he appears to be acting with his body and senses, he is always conscious of his actual position, which is spiritual engagement. In material consciousness, the senses are engaged in sense gratification. But in Krishna consciousness, the senses are engaged in satisfaction of Krishna's senses. Therefore, the Krishna conscious person is always free, even though he appears to be engaged in things of the senses. Activities such as seeing, hearing, speaking, evacuating, etc. are actions of the senses meant for work. A Krishna conscious person is never affected by the actions of the senses. He cannot perform any act except in the service of the Lord, because he knows that he is the eternal servitor of the Lord. Text 10 translation. One who performs his duty without attachment, surrendering the results to the Supreme Lord, is not affected by sinful action, as the lotus leaf is untouched by water. Here, Brahmani means Krishna consciousness. The material world is a sum total manifestation of three modes of material nature, technically called pradhana. The Vedic hymns indicate that everything in the material world is manifested as Brahman, and although the effects are differently manifested, they are not different from the cause. In the Isopanishad, it is said that everything is related to Supreme Brahman or Krishna, and thus everything belongs to him only. One who knows perfectly well that everything belongs to Krishna, that he is the proprietor of everything, and that therefore everything is engaged in the service of the Lord, naturally has nothing to do with the results of his activities, whether virtuous or sinful. Even one's material body, being a gift of the Lord by carrying out particular type of action, can be engaged in Krishna consciousness. It is beyond contamination by sinful reactions. Exactly as the lotus leaf, though remaining in the water, it is not wet. The Lord also says in the Gita, Mayi sarvani karmani sannyasa. Resign all works into me. The conclusion is that person without Krishna consciousness acts according to the concept of a material body and senses. But a person in the Krishna consciousness acts according to the knowledge that the body is the property of Krishna and should therefore be engaged in the service of Krishna. Text 11 translation. The yogis, abandoning the attachment, act with body, mind, intelligence, and even with the senses, only for the purpose of purification. By acting in Krishna consciousness for the satisfaction of the senses of Krishna, any action, whether of the body, mind, intelligence, or even in the senses, is purified of a material contamination. There are no material reactions resulting from the activities of the Krishna conscious person. Therefore, purified activities, which are generally called sadachara, can be easily performed by acting in Krishna consciousness. Sri Rupa Goswami in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu describes as this follows. A person acting in Krishna consciousness, or in other words, in the service of Krishna, with his body, mind, intelligence, and words, is a liberated person. Even within the material world, although he may be engaged in many so-called material activities, he has no false ego, nor does he believe that he is this body. He is this material body, not that he possesses the body. He knows that he is not this body and that this body does not belong to him. He himself belongs to Krishna and the body too belongs to Krishna. When he applies everything a product of body, mind, intelligence, words, life, wealth, etc., whatever he may have within his possession to Krishna's service, he is at once detailed with Krishna. He is one with Krishna and is devoid of the false ego that leads one to believe that he is the body, etc. This is the perfect stage of Krishna consciousness. Text 12 translation. The steadily devoted soul attains unadulterated peace because he offers the results of all activities to me, whereas a person who is not in union with the divine, who is greedy for the fruits of his labor, becomes entangled. The difference between a person in Krishna consciousness and a person in bodily consciousness is that the former is attached to Krishna, whereas the latter is attached to the results of the activities. The person who is attached to Krishna and works for him only is certainly a liberated person, and he is not anxious for fruitive rewards. In the Bhagavatam, the cause of anxiety over the result of an activity is explained as being due to one's functioning in the conception of duality, that is, without knowledge of absolute truth. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In Krishna consciousness, there is no duality. All that exists is the product of Krishna's energy, and Krishna is all good. Therefore, activities in Krishna consciousness are on the absolute plane. They are transcendental and have no material effect. One is therefore filled with peace in Krishna consciousness. One who is, however, entangled in a profit calculation for sense gratification cannot have that peace. This is the secret of Krishna consciousness realization. That there is no existence beside the Krishna is the platform of peaceful and fearfulness. Text 13 translation. When the embodied living being controls his nature and mentally renounces all actions, he resides happily in the city of 9 gates, neither working, 9 gates the material body, neither working nor causing work to be done. The embodied soul lives in the city of 9 gates. The activities of the body or a figurative city of the body are conducted automatically by the particular modes of nature. The soul, although subjecting himself to be conditions of the body, can be beyond these conditions if he so desires. Owing only to forgetfulness of the superior nature, he identifies with the material body and therefore suffers. By Krishna consciousness, he can revive his real position and thus come out of this embodiment. Therefore, when one takes to Krishna consciousness, at once becomes completely aloof from the bodily activities. In such a controlled life in which his deliberations are changed, he lives happily within the city of 9 gates. The 9 gates are described as follows. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is living within the body of living entity, is the controller of all living entities all over the universe. The body consists of 9 gates, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears, 1 mouth, the anus and the genital. The living entity in his condition states identify himself with the body, but when he identifies himself with the Lord within himself, he becomes just as free as the Lord, even while in the body. Therefore, a Krishna conscious person is free from both the outer and inner activities of the material body. Text 14 translation. The embodied soul, the embodied spirit, master of the city of his body, does not create activities, nor does he induce people to act, nor does he create the fruits of action. All this is enacted by the modes of material nature. The living entity, as will be explained in the 7th chapter, is one in nature with the Supreme Lord, distinguished from matter, which is another nature, called inferior of the Lord. Somehow, the superior nature, the living entity, has been in contact with the material nature since the time immemorial. The temporary body or a material dwelling place which he obtains is the cause of varieties of activities and the resultant reactions. Living in such a atmosphere, one suffers the results of the activities of the body by identifying himself in ignorance with the body. It is ignorance acquired from the immemorial that is the cause of bodily suffering and distress. As soon as the living entity becomes aloof from the activities of the body, he becomes free from the reactions as well. As long as he is in the city of the body, He appears to be the master of it, but actually he is neither its proprietor nor controller of its actions and reactions. He is simply in the midst of the material ocean, struggling for existence. The waves of the ocean are tossing him, and he has no control over them. His best solution is to get out of the water by transcendental Krishna consciousness. That alone will save him from all turmoil. Text 15 translation. Nor does the Supreme Spirit assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of the ignorance which covers the real knowledge. The Sanskrit word Vibhu means Supreme Lord, who is full of unlimited knowledge, riches, strength, fame, beauty, and renunciation. He is always satisfied in himself, undisturbed by the sinful or pious activities. He does not create a particular situation for any living entity, but the living entity, bewildered by the ignorance, desire to be put into a certain conditions of life, and thereby his chain of action and reaction begins. A living entity is by superior nature full of knowledge, nevertheless he is prone to be influenced by ignorance due to his limited power. The Lord is omnipotent, but the living entity is not. The Lord is Vibhu or omniscient, but the living entity is Anu or atomic. Because he is living soul, he has the capacity to desire by his free will. Such desire is fulfilled only by the omnipotent Lord. And so when the living entity is bewildered in his desire, the Lord allows him to fulfill those desires. But the Lord is never responsible for the actions and reactions of the particular situation which may be desired. Being in bewildered condition, therefore the embodied soul identifies himself with the circumstantial material body and becomes subjected to the temporary misery and happiness of the life. The Lord is the constant companion of the living entity as the Paramatma or the superior soul, and therefore he can understand the desires of the individual soul. As one can smell the flavor of a flower by being near it, desire is a subtle form of conditioning of the living entity. The Lord fulfills his desires as he deserves. Man proposes and God disposes. The individual is not therefore omnipotent in fulfilling his desires. The Lord, however, can fulfill all the desires, and the Lord, being neutral to everyone, does not interfere with the desires of the minute independent living entity. However, when one desires Krishna, the Lord takes special care and encourages one to desire in such a way that one can attain to him and be eternally happy. The Vedic human therefore declares, the Lord engages the living entities in pious activities so he may be elevated. The Lord engages him in impious activities so he may go to hell. The living entity is completely dependent on his distress and happiness. By the will of the Supreme, he can go to heaven or hell, as clouds is driven by the air. Therefore, the embodied soul, by his immemorial desire to avoid Krishna consciousness, causes his own bewilderment. Consequently, although he is consequently eternal, blissful and cognizant, due to the littleness of his existence, he forgets his constitutional position of the service to the Lord, and is thus entrapped by the nuisance. And under the spell of ignorance, the living entity claims that the Lord is responsible for his conditional existence. The Vedanta Sutras also confirms that the Lord neither hates nor likes anyone, though he appears to. That ends the translation of Srimad Bhagavad-Gita, text 15 of chapter 5. Hare Krishna, keep listening. Thank you very much.